want to say a quick thanks. We had phenomenal people on this writing group. Many highly regarded high school athletic trainers combined with top medical people and top scientific people. We really combined the actual clinicians who deal with this on a daily basis with the scientific minds and medical minds who actually study this on a daily basis. But I think we have to go back in history first to really get a sense of where we are today. In 1905, during that college football season, 18 people died in one college football season, and 149 had permanent injuries, meaning they were just incapacitated because of their head injuries or spinal cord injuries or things like that in one football season. Theodore Roosevelt convened all the presidents in the United States who hosted football programs at their school, called them into his office just after that season ended, and he said, "I am absolutely abolishing college football in America." He goes, "unless you come up with a strategy that can make it safer for athletes." Well, about a month later, the NCAA was formed. So they listened to presidents more so than maybe some other people. But I think there's a history lesson there that was unacceptable, that kind of fatalities and those kinds of things that we're seeing. But you can fast forward to this past year. In just a 6-week stretch, guys, we lost 18 people in 6 weeks in 1 year. Do not ever think things are getting better. They're absolutely getting worse in terms of death at the high school level. Okay? It is the worst decade on record, besides for the 60s, in terms of heat stroke deaths. And we know so much more about it than we ever have before. But obviously, that message and the actual policies in state medical boards and state coaches groups are certainly not taking all of those messages and making it better for athletes. Guys, I know this firsthand. 24 years ago, I had a heat stroke running a 10K race in the track in upstate New York at the Empire State Games. They had very bad policies, which is the reason I had the heat stroke that day. They did not allow water during the 25-lap race, and they decided to have the 10K in the middle of the day, okay, while they were running the sprints under the lights at night. All right, so those are two just examples of why I had a heat stroke that day. Well, the reason why kids have heat strokes at high school football, soccer, and cross-country practices across America is because we tend to have very poor policies that look out for their health and safety. That's why we convened these guidelines. These are the first ever guidelines or recommendations for the phasing in of practices for heat acclimatization for high school athletes. And this is a population we should have the greatest concern about because there's no bigger population of athletes in America than high school athletes, as Marge just said in terms of the numbers. So another thing just to keep in mind is that the greatest risk is in the first 2 to 3 days. If people are going to have a heat stroke or die from other causes during activity, it happens usually in the first 2 to 3 days. And the reason is the athlete's not ready physiologically for the stresses that the coach wants to put them under in those days. Okay? In some states, you could have 3 3-hour practices in the very first day, okay, in full gear in the heat. Okay? Well, there's some basic things that actually happen in the human body physiologically. That's something called heat acclimatization. And your body, through the course of 7 to 10 days, develops some pretty powerful physiological changes after you get used to exercise in the heat. Things like increasing your sweat rate, earlier onset of sweating. Basically, the bottom line, it increases your exercise heat tolerance. You can perform better, longer, at a higher intensity when you're in the heat after you've become heat acclimatized. So the absolute last thing you want to do is put an athlete through the most grueling practices during the first 2 to 3 days because the body's not ready for it yet. You can still put them through those tough, grueling practices, but after they've had a chance to actually adapt their body to get physiologically ready for those things. And that's why you'll see in our guidelines, we don't allow 2-a-day practices in the first 5 days. You phase in other things, and Dave will talk about some of the specifics of that. But the bottom line is that these things are based on what we've learned scientifically of how the human body changes when it exercises in the heat. And we've taken this knowledge, this body of knowledge, scientific and medical, and converted it into a practical playing situation. And it's not just for football, guys. Okay, soccer players have heat stroke, and I've treated them. And cross-country runners have heat stroke, and we just lost a cross-country athlete from heat stroke. So it's just, it can happen to any sport. It can even happen with a volleyball player who has to practice inside in the South, where you guys know they don't have air conditioning, a lot of facilities, and they're doing conditioning in a 125-degree tinderbox. Okay. I want you to know also this was not written for the coaches or the athletic directors or anybody else involved with the school. This was written for the athletes. Okay, for their health and safety. It was written for their parents for when they drop them off of practice, that they actually feel secure knowing that there's actually some guidelines looking out for their child's well-being so they don't get a call to pick them up at the hospital instead of at practice. Right? This was written for the athletes. There will be some hardship in terms of phasing this in, and for schools to make changes. And I hope they're actually proactive instead of reactive, that they do it when they realize it's good for the athletes, and not just do it after the lawsuit mandates, of which I've been on 12 different lawsuits, that mandate changes in policies after the lawsuit happens. Okay? So hopefully we actually can start making progress to see some of these changes take place. It's going to be a long road. I talked with Franny earlier. I said it's basically going to be a 10-year process now to try to get at least these minimal standards into all the high schools. Some high schools, some states have outstanding policies, but some of them lack greatly in many areas. So those are my thoughts. Some of the other people are going to have some things to say, and we'll also have time for questions after. Once again, I do want to say thank you for the people who devote a lot of time to this document. And the road is long. It's going to take a while to get this going. And another just caveat that you have to get out there, especially from a media perspective, is that we can do everything possible with the guidelines that we've set forth in this document. Heat strokes can still occur. You might have somebody go out to the field that day who has a fever and wants to make the team, doesn't want to complain to anybody, doesn't tell them that they're sick, goes down with a heat stroke. So you have to still be able to treat heat strokes. Okay? And you do not want coaches in charge of the medical care of athletes. And you might have seen this whole saga unfolding up in Kentucky in the legislature with what happened there this past summer and this winter with the criminal case with heat stroke. So you want, these schools need to have athletic trainers on site before, during, and after practice responsible for the prevention, recognition, and treatment of heat stroke. And some people will talk more about that, but it's extremely important to understand that we can do everything we possible to prevent it, but heat strokes can still occur. Okay, and we got to be ready to actually treat them. Okay, second speaker today is going to be Dave Salon, who spent a very long time working as an athletic trainer at the high school level. This actual document, this actual concept, this idea, this is his puppy. Okay, him and I touched base probably about 3 years ago, and we combined my expertise and knowledge and passion for studying this with his expertise and experience of working at the high school level, and joined forces to actually make this happen.